On this week's episode of the Live Faith First podcast, we continue our journey through Advent. And Abby Olcese, author and movie critic, joins us as we take a look at each week's Advent theme and connect it to a film. So this week's theme is joy, and joy is way more than happiness. And we connect that with the film Paddington and Paddington 2. We're going to find out that joy is something that exudes out of people. It changes the world around us. In fact, it is resistance to adversity. And then we're going to connect that with Mary's prayer when she goes to visit her cousin who's pregnant with John the Baptist. It is a prayer that is full of hope and faith and joy. And so sit down today and enjoy this episode of the Live Faith First podcast. Joy is more than a person's name. It's more than a big smile on your face. It's something deeper than that. This season, we sing songs like Joy to the World. It's a great Christmas song, but did you know it was originally intended to be about Jesus's second coming, not his first coming? But that's the fun of Advent. Each week sits in this tension of celebrating the past and anticipating the future. The first 2 weeks of faith and hope were about celebrating Jesus' first arrival as a baby in a manger and also keeping the faith and hope until he returns a second time. And this week is no different. Now, Abby, you are with us again to take us on this journey through Advent. So thank you for joining us. You ready to talk about joy today?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, let's do this. All right, tell us about joy. What is it? What's the significance of it?
Sure. So when we talk about joy, I think we'll talk about the Magnificat a little bit later. We talk about kind of joy's expression, basically. But joy is, I think, more than just kind of an expression of happiness, although it is that.
Yes.
So like in Galatians, Paul talks about joy as a fruit of the Spirit. So it being kind of a byproduct, basically, of living a faithful life in God and in Christ, is that joy is kind of a way that you interact with the world. It can be a way that you see the world. It's as a music fan, I love this punk band named Idols, and they have an album called Joy as an Act of Resistance, which is another concept that I really like. So in dark times, not necessarily being kind of a pie-eyed optimist, but seeking
Yes.
out relationships and things and experiences that give you kind of a sustaining sense of joy, and doing that to kind of get you through difficult times, not to ignore them, but to recognize that you have the right to feel and express those things, and to kind of consider what it can look like if you live joyfully, if you live with an outward sense of joy that reflects an inward sense of hope and faith, what the world around you can look like as a result.
Yeah. I love that. There's so many pieces of that I love. One, that it's not just happiness. It's something deeper than that,
Mm-hmm.
that it doesn't ignore the reality around you. And I'll probably say this a little bit later again, but like joy is built on these building blocks of hope and faith.
Mm-hmm.
Like without hope and faith, there's joy is different, right?
Yeah.
Joy is different without hope and faith. I'm not sure if joy is possible. I won't go for an absolute statement, but it's really difficult without hope and faith. Like if we don't believe there's something else that is happening, that will happen, if we don't have faith in God and what he's doing, then joy becomes just kind of this naive kind of response to ignore what's going on around us. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's what joy is. And my last comment on what you just said, joy is a fruit of the Spirit. That is so good, right?
Yeah.
It's a second love, joy, peace, right? And it's more than an emotion. It's something deeper than that. So good. I love that. All right. Now, you chose Paddington and Paddington 2 to connect with joy. So it was a kid's book that I read growing up. So I was familiar with Paddington, but so much fun to watch those movies. Give us a 50,000 view picture of who Paddington is and kind of how that lived out in his community.
Absolutely. So I adore the Paddington movies, and in early January, I believe we are getting the third one, which I am very excited for. So if nothing else, you can watch 1 and 2 as a precursor to The third
I
film.
love it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. So Paddington is a bear from Peru who, following a disaster, ends up moving to London, and he arrives in London looking for a family to live with, and ends up living with this family called the Browns, who are very, very sweet and very generously minded, but kind of have to go on a journey to get to that point. That's sort of the journey of the first movie, is them recognizing that Paddington has a home with them. And the second film kind of expands that view even further, to kind of explore what the effect that Paddington has on the community around him. So Paddington saying famously is one that comes from his beloved Aunt Lucy, who is the character that took care of him when he was growing up and sent him to live in London after this earthquake that kind of destroyed their home. And she says, "If we are kind and polite, the world will be right," which is, I think, it feels very British, but it's also very true that if we are kind to other people, if we treat them with politeness, even if we disagree with them, and if we kind of engage with them genuinely as the people that they are, and recognize what their needs are and how we can help them in an everyday kind of way, then the world around us kind of looks different. And so I don't mean to glaze over the first Paddington movie, because it is delightful, but I feel like the message of what it means to live a joyful life really gets depicted in its fullness in the second film. Because Paddington, it opens with Paddington having this wonderful relationship with everybody in his neighborhood. He sees the small needs that make up his community. He helps a garbage man study for a test that can help him get a better job. He gives a woman a sandwich every day on her way to work that helps her have a better day. He helps his neighbor, who keeps forgetting his keys when he leaves the apartment, to go back in and get his keys before the door shuts and he's locked out. He helps a couple of lonely neighbors find love. So the world around him is bright and joyful and happy. And then, oddly, Paddington is framed for a crime he did not commit and goes to jail.
And arrested.
And gets arrested. But even then, Paddington cannot help but turn the jail around him into a wonderful and joyful place, because he wants to have a good relationship with everybody around him. And so he recognizes that the other prisoners in the jail are good at certain things, and he helps them to kind of, realize their ambitions. And the jail goes from this gray and sad place to this beautiful tea room that is kind of festooned with cakes and bunting and bright, happy songs.
And marmalade, of
and
course.
Marmalade, yeah.
Right.
And meanwhile, we also get the opposite of that in his neighborhood, which we see while he's gone, that it's kind of gone back to this kind of gray and self-interested place where people are not taking care of each other, because the one factor that was helping them to look outward is gone. So that's all in Paddington 2. The first film, which I also adore, is kind of this joyful character in Paddington who kind of creates a mess sometimes, but always means well and is always trying to do his best and always wants to kind of be part of the community that he's in and be of help and be of value. Kind of finding his new place in this community, which is really diverse. There's a calypso band that appears throughout the film, kind of playing different songs throughout the soundtrack, which is a nod to the West Indian roots of the neighborhood where that movie takes place, in Portobello Road. And we kind of see that sort of incorporated directly into the film. We see all of these elements of color in places where there is joy, in lack of color and drabness where there is not joy or general distrust in Paddington's identity and what he's there to accomplish. There's a neighbor named Mr. Curry who's kind of he's not the big bad, but he's not a great dude. And he distrusts everybody in the neighborhood. He's really paranoid, and his home is kind of this gross place that hasn't been changed since his mother died in the 70s, and so everything's kind of dry and gross and not well taken care of. So some of it is genuinely silly, but I think it's all done in service of this story about a character who really wants to find where he belongs and kind of makes that happen through being joyful, and by extension spreads that experience of joy to other people. A lot of people have said that it's a really great kind of a fable of welcoming the stranger, basically, of immigrants and refugees, because Paddington technically is a refugee from a natural disaster that happens in his home. And I genuinely don't mean that as a joke. Like, this is a really great way to map onto the benefits that come with having a diverse community and welcoming people who want to be part of your community, even if they're not from there originally.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was such a fun movie. And I skip over it because I'm an adult and I don't watch children's movies. Who would do that?
Sure.
Right? But and I miss out because I do, right? Our daughter's in college now, so I don't have to watch Moana and all of those great Disney movies, right? But it really was so much fun to watch this kind of clumsy bear with a guiding principle. Mm-hmm. And just to watch how he, like everything you've described, how he lived that out in his community and the impact that it had, even when he was flooding bathrooms, even when, there was bad things happening around him, he somehow, that guiding principle drove him to just bring joy into his world. Do you have a Paddington in your life? Like, is there somebody who like brings you joy? Like, oh man, I'm looking forward to seeing that person. Or maybe it's a guiding principle person. You're like, man, every time I'm with them, I know that they, will kind of.
Man, that is a good question.
Bring some life. I mean, other than my wife definitely does this for me, just because I like spending time with my wife. So she's the best one that I could come up with. Which, after 20-some years, is not too bad that she's still bringing joy into my life. So
that's great.
But do you have a Paddington?
That's a good question. I think I have a number of friends who are still in my life to varying degrees. Like I say that because a lot of us live far apart. And so the joy is what comes when we're all back together in the same place. And I can kind of get a sense of what that experience is going to be like. And that sense of anticipatory joy is really a thing that powers me.
Yeah, I love that.
Of being able to connect with people who I know are going to get me on some level that I don't always get to have that same level of conversation with everybody in my life. And so those are the things that really do bring me joy. But I think it also comes, for me, it comes a lot aesthetically. Like, I like looking at things that make me feel joyful. I like stuff that has a lot of color. I like to try and bring that into my life. And I feel like that is, that desire to have joyful things around me, I think is something that, at least in the sense of these movies, I really like the idea of that being a byproduct of something that you can actually bring to other people, that can be active and not just something that you have in your own personal space. So it's kind of a both and. I look for joy in lots of places and lots of things. And sometimes it's a more muscular joy, and sometimes it's a more kind of buoyant and delightful joy. And I think both of those are things that kind of, that have a place in my life. And I like to try and pursue that as much as possible.
Yeah. I love that. Because you're absolutely right. There's places, there's views, whether you're on a mountaintop looking over, a valley, or at a lake, or at the beach, like there's places that give you joy as well. Like, again, that anticipatory, I'm looking forward to hanging out with, but also I'm looking forward to being there, because whether that place has memories or it's just this beautiful visual, location, right? That you're like, oh my goodness, this gives me joy. I've gone on walks through forests smiling. Because I just like, wow, these trees are amazing. Or man, look at that banana slug. We have I don't know if you've heard of banana slugs, but they're these big, fat, yellow. That we get in the Santa Cruz Mountains here in California.
You may be the only person I know who finds joy in banana slugs.
I saw one like a month ago and I had to take a picture of it. I'm like, oh, banana slugs, so cool.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one of those for a little while. And so the small things too can bring us joy, right?
Yeah.
And the Paddington story and the story, and we'll get to Mary in just a moment here, is bringing joy into people's lives. But I also agree with you that how we recognize joy around us too. and it is in the moments of, wow, I enjoyed that bagel. That bagel brought me joy. It was perfect, or I don't know, small things too, right? It
Yeah,
just kind
yeah.
of,
I find that real true joy for me is kind of all encompassing. Like it is, it's something that invades all the senses.
so good.
And I one of the things that I really like about this movie, about both of these movies, is that joy is kind of all encompassing in them as well. Like it is a joyful experience to watch these movies because they are so well made. In addition to the fact that they are sweet and fun. Like every set is informative in terms of like the characters, and it's also kind of let me think. I think aspirational, basically, and like what you would like the world to look like.
Yeah.
So like
Yes.
even boring office buildings can be beautiful and exciting and fun if they are designed in a way that sparks that kind of joy, right? That makes you want to be there. This is a world in general that the director Paul King creates that we never want to leave, and part of that is because it is designed with joy in mind, and it's designed to remind us that the places where joy is present kind of make us feel like that they are places where we want to be present, that we never want to leave, that we want to kind of dig in deeper to and figure out how they work the way that they work, and how we can bring some of that into the parts of our lives that aren't as obviously joyful, which is kind of an extra little layer on top of this, that as a film critic, as somebody who looks at the whole film like in all of its different parts, I think it's really cool the way that the idea of joy kind of suffuses every single part of these movies.
Yeah. So good. All right, let's move over to Mary. Let's make this connection here. So the Magnificat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Magnificat?
Magnificat, yeah.
Okay. I always read it with an N at the end, like the Magnificent, and it's not. It is no N before the
I like the
final
idea
T.
of Magnificent being like that's a thing that you can do. Like if you're saying the Magnificat, you are the Magnificent, which is cool.
Right. Yeah. There we go. So tell us about this section of the Bible. Kind of give us a little bit of background, and like, why are you choosing this passage in relation to joy?
Yeah, so this is often a passage that gets read in and preached on in churches in relation to the celebration of joy in Advent, because this is the passage where Mary goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who is pregnant with John the Baptist. And Elizabeth and her husband are older, and so that was a pregnancy that they didn't think was going to happen, and has led to some really interesting things in their own life too, that I also really love about the Advent story. So Elizabeth's husband is actually like struck dumb for the entirety of her pregnancy, and isn't able to proclaim anything until after he's born, which I always think is kind of this extra sort of funny but also really fascinating part of the Advent story that at least in my church, we end up talking about it quite a bit, but I know a lot of other churches don't necessarily. But so this is the whole section is like Luke 1:39 through 55. But parts of Mary's proclamation to Elizabeth, and when they meet, the baby in Elizabeth's belly jumps for joy at the recognition of Mary and of the baby in her belly. Which is also an image and a feeling that I love, of being able to kind of physically feel that recognition between two souls in another person's body, even if they're not born yet, which is, I think, really sweet. But Mary's words of praise are often about how the entire social order is about to change. Which is kind of in keeping with Luke as a gospel. Luke is very kind of social justice focused and has a lot of focus on the poor and the sick, and those who really do need, words and actions of grace and hope and love. So in verses 52 and 53, she says, "He has brought down the rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things. He has sent the rich away empty." So this is an expression of kind of both of those kinds of joy that I mentioned before, kind of this ebullient and happy feeling that just kind of fills you and spills out, and you can't help but feel praiseworthy and want to share that with other people. But it's also kind of a muscular joy. It's joy as an act of resistance. Mary in this passage is recognizing that things are not the way that they're supposed to be, but that God has told her that all of that is about to change pretty significantly, and that she's going to play a part in that. And how exciting is that? Like, that is very joyful. and kind of the realization also that Elizabeth is going to be part of that journey as well, that Elizabeth and her baby have a role to play in that story. So it's this wonderful sense of recognition and joy between two women who are at a very expectant and exciting period in their own lives. It's a moment of joy and recognition between their two unborn children, which is really cool. And it's also a larger kind of world changing sense of joy and expectant happiness, that this thing is going to happen. It's going to be really great. We don't know exactly how it's going to go. We just know that it's going to be important. It's going to be special. And how cool is it that we get to be part of it?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that description. And like we were saying earlier, that whole passage is filled with hope and faith. So the joy that we see in John the Baptist leaping in his mother's womb, the joy that we have when these two people get together, the joy that Mary's cousin has because she is pregnant at an older age, like all of that though is founded on that hope and faith that God is faithful, that God is going to show up, that something is happening. And so again, that joy that, like, again, to kind of circle back, that joy, it's not just this fake happiness of, okay, I'm just going to smile through it, fake it till we make it. Okay, I'm just going to, put on this outward show. It comes from a deep place of trusting in God, having faith in God, hoping in God. And then that kind of has these results in joy. And one of the ways you said it is nothing that she was proclaiming had happened had actually happened.
Right.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The world had not changed yet. The kings and the rich had not gone away yet. Right. So, and to some degree, it hasn't even happened now. Like, to some degree, we're still anticipating that. And again, that tension of Advent, right? Where we look back and celebrate and we look forward anticipating more. So,
yeah. I really like the idea of Mary's understanding and realization that that this is a thing that she gets to be an active part in, that is still happening. As a kid, and I think even as an adult too. Like I love like big epic fantasy stories. I love like genre fiction. That's like has always been some of my favorite stuff growing up. And as a kid, I always was like, man, I wish I could live an adventure like this. I wish I could live in a fantastical world where these things are possible. And every once in a while I get, maybe I don't live in a world that has like hobbits or talking animals, but which is a real bummer, man. Let me tell you.
Seriously,
yeah.
I'm hoping heaven has that. That would be great.
Super cool. Yes. But there are there are ways to have to be part of bigger things and exciting, adventurous things in your own life. And often that comes through relationships. Sometimes that comes through collective action. Sometimes that comes through kind of taking a big leap that you weren't, necessarily expecting that you'd be able to do. In some ways, like, not to toot my own horn or anything, but in some ways, producing, writing, and editing a book and putting it out into the world is a big leap. Like, that in itself was an adventure. And it's really cool to think about kind of the joy that comes with realizing that you're part of a bigger story, when you realize that there's something else going on outside of you that you are still part of. I get a great sense of joy out of that. Like, it's a real sense of not necessarily accomplishment, but just like of fulfillment, of self-fulfillment, of community fulfillment, and realizing that there are places where you can kind of lift yourself and others up at the same time and kind of create the world that you want to be. Is, I think, its own sense of joy.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Just playing a part in a bigger story. I mean, it's easy to picture. I easily picture myself, especially if you go out at night and you see a sky full of stars and you feel so small, or you go onto a beach and you see all of these, little pieces of sand, and you feel like a little piece of sand kind of in this universe.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to minimize kind of who we are just because of the vastness of creation.
Yeah.
But to have this sense that I'm part of something bigger. I'm part of something that God is doing, and my role is to play my part in that. and yes, I can organize, I can come together, I can move the needle forward. And I'm not saying that on some sort of I'm powerful enough to do so, because I believe that's God doing his work. But for some odd reason, he's encouraged us to join in with him.
Yeah.
And he still chooses to use us as part of his kingdom building initiatives. Right. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
I love
yeah,
just
that we
being
get to be
part of that.
instruments and part of that. And I mean, to bring it back to Paddington, Paddington is a really good instrument of that joy in other people's lives. And I think the movies both consistently kind of talk about, like, in a way, it's kind of looking at Britain's legacy of welcoming refugees and immigrants. And kind of serving as a reminder that it can be like that again if we want it to be. The world can be like that if we want it to be again. There
Yeah.
are kind of frequent references in the film to the period called the Kinder Transport, where it was a thing that took place during World War II, and this was a time when German children and children from other parts of the world as well were brought from their countries of origin to England to live with British families for the duration of the war, or with family members. And so the films kind of use that as a time when Britain was welcoming, and as an example of basically that there's always a place here for people who need it. There's a character in the film named Mr. Gruber who is basically a product of the Kinder Transport, that he was brought to England to live with an aunt and now has his own shop and is kind of, welcoming in that regard to other people. There's also another movie that I would highly recommend called One Life, that is about a man named Nicholas Winton, who was responsible for getting a lot of refugees out of Central Europe and the Czech Republic particularly. And one thing I really like about that movie is that it is very clear about the fact that was, while organized by, a handful of people, was something that took the work of many individual people who were, smaller instruments in a larger story, that kind of had to exercise, hope and faith in making sure that everything would go okay, but realizing that they had a part to play in making sure that those parts ran smoothly, but that they also couldn't control everything, and how that kind of enabled an entire generation of people to be able to continue living and to continue experiencing joy in their own lives. Excuse me. So I think what we see is that when you are even able to do a small thing for another person, that in turn enables them to kind of forward that joy to other people, to be, as a result of being happier, of having received that gift, that they can pass what they've felt on to other people. And in the Paddington movies, we see how that kind of ends up kind of seeping into the world around him, starting with the Brown family and then kind of leaking out into the neighborhood, and then eventually even to a place as, potentially dark and hopeless as a prison. That there is, potential for good and moments of joy there too. By recognizing, the humanity and the dignity of the people there and what they're able to provide, and finding ways for them to kind of be, tools of happiness and joy in their own setting. So kind of it's sort of a bloom where you're planted situation, but it's really nice to see kind of a fullness of what that bloom can really be if we actively try to pursue that.
Yeah. I love that. All right, Abby, again, such a fun conversation this week about joy. Loved it. And do encourage all the movies that we've talked about. They're such fun movies. So, I hope you're following along with us by also watching the movies maybe after or before you've listened to this podcast, because they really are good. And my wife, who does not like animation, she calls them cartoons.
Sure.
Paddington is not a cartoon. It is not animation. All right. Yes, there is a bear there that is animated, but it's one of, it's live action. But just because it might be under the children's movie genre, this should not keep you from enjoying this amazing piece of art. So check out the Paddington movies if you haven't already. So, all right. Abby, we're coming down to our final week of Advent next week.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's get ready to talk about peace. So again, thank you so much for joining the podcast, and everybody out there, let's live faith first.